Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're doing another in the War Thunder Talk series, and once again we're going back to update 1.71 to talk about the Rank 6 US tanks. Now today I am joined by Bad Mofo. He is one of the lead members of the Squadron XOF and a pretty seasoned tanker when it comes to the Americans. So today we're going to cover mainly the MBT and the M60 Rise and talking about their matchups and stuff like that. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, man.
So, first of all, we're going to talk about the M60 Rise and kind of how it fits in the game, mainly looking at its major components, then maybe expanding from there. So, when it comes to the maneuverability aspect of the M60 Rise, would you say it's pretty similar to the other M60s we have?
Yeah, it's very similar to the M60 AOS and the M60 A2 Starship. Comparing those two, I do find that the Starship seems to be more maneuverable, a little more acceleration. Transverse turns is a little bit better than the AOS, but I would say the Rise is right there with the Starship. They're pretty much mirror finishes of each other when it comes to maneuverability.
And when it comes to the two main differences between the normal tree M60 and the M60 Rise in Rank 6, we're basically looking at ammunition and armor. So, with ammunition, which is the one to prioritize? Basically, if you have it spaded, does it matter on the vehicles that you're fighting, or is it more about which is just the overall best?
Well, if talking about the Rise with the ammunition, the APFSDS round is a must. For it to compete, you have to have that round. The Heat FS, I mean, it does okay, but you got to think too in the settings where you have obstacles to shoot through, and you're fighting the 9.0 or 8.7 tanks. You definitely want something that's going to pin through those obstacles. At the bare minimal, more likely you're going to be running your APDS round. But if you can do it, go ahead and spade it out. You really want to go for the APFSDS round for the Rise right as fast as you can. And even though I know it's at the line 4 on your modifications, I know it's a dry run, but if you can afford the GE to go and get it, I would really suggest to do that for the Rise to compete. But without that round there, the APFSDS round, this tank is still, its survivability is still the same, but so far as your killability facing the other 8.7 9.0 tanks, it's not going to be as effective.
So you talk there about its survivability. Basically, the big difference between it and the Rank 5 M60 is the fact that it has this addition of ERA. And it's one of the only vehicles we actually have in the game which has ERA, at least for now. I mean, a lot of people have talked about the Japanese Rank 6 getting them. But is it a worthwhile upgrade? Especially against some of these new Rank 6 9.0 tanks throwing around really high penetrating shells?
Yes, it's one of those things where, you read all this information on the forums or in actual Google searches or whatnot, and you come up with your own assumption about that or your own opinion. From first-hand opinions, running the Rise with ERA on it is a significant difference, and I find it very effective, of course, against your heat and chemical rounds, but also I'm finding it, very effective or giving you that second chance with kinetic rounds. Now, I have had, of course, the 264's APFSDS rounds at stock, and its upgraded round of that. Both pin me one shot, of course. But it's not as often as it is as you would think against the ERA. Now, your heat rounds and your ATGMs hitting it, you definitely are going to get maybe second and third chances. I've gotten up to almost 4 or 5 chances before with it, Another thing that helps the M60 Rise is its crew spacing, in my opinion, along with the ERA. They can't one-shot your whole crew out, especially if you got a half an ammo load. You're using your modern tactics to survive in the game. But the ERA is definitely significant in this game, in my opinion, so far as a slugfest in the urban warfare in a town or city. That is, nothing else competes against it so far as giving you second and third chances, if not more, if you can manipulate your combat standing to take rounds and new ERA placements, to pull off shots.
So you talked about urban warfare with the M60 Rise, this idea of fighting maybe down a corridor, holding a space, trying to trade shots at close range. So we'll move on to the MBT, which seems to be pretty much the opposite. What you kind of want is more open ground, being able to shoot from very far away, especially with the ATGMs, and maybe like a map like Fulda would fit that, whereas on the M60 Rise, like, would you say something like Advance to the Rhine, would that make a bit more sense?
Yes, I agree 100%. Advance to the Rhine or anything like that, chopped up, real close quarters, I would choose the Rise over the MBT every time, just for the fact that you're going to make close quarters and the armor factors and the fact that MBT 70 and the KP are both pretty much glass barrels on equal playing grounds. And I would definitely use the KP or the MBT as a backup in those urban warfare settings, especially back when the repair costs were three times as much as what they do now. Thank God that that was updated, and now I'm only paying 7,000 lines for repair costs on the MB, and I believe only 5,000 on the Rise. So that was also a deciding factor at that point till that update was changed. But yes, Rise on urban, close quarters, where you could be ambushed real fast and, under 300 meters, would choose the Rise for sure. But Fulda, Sinai, MBT 70 is what I would choose real fast. I'd actually, talking about the ammo load going along with that, would be APF SDS rounds. Usually I run about 20 on the MBT 70 and 10 ATGMs. Just really is map dependent on between the two, but yesly, urban warfare Rise initially, MBT is secondary. Open maps like Fulda, MBT primary, and Rise secondary.
And with the MBT moving onto it, you talked about the different shells that you decide to use, taking more of the APFSDS. Is that just because of the strength of something like a T-64A with the armor on its turret?
Yes, correct. The APF SDS round is my go-to round on the MBT and of course the Rise. As we discussed already, the MBT 70, it's been, I can't officially say this or that because I have no sources, only from experience of gameplay, but on day one of the server opening on this, or the update or patch, whatever you want to call it, I had the MBT 70 the first hour. I did GE it. I spaded it out the first hour I had it, and facing T-64s that day, the first hour after that. My APF SDS rounds were bouncing off the upper glacis. They wore, the T-64's armor was productive, in my opinion, against that round. I had to hit them in the lower glacis, and I had to side pin them or either just get lucky in the turret ring area right above the driver's seat. I want to say 2 or 3 days later, I noticed that all of a sudden my APF SDS rounds were pinning through the upper glacis, one shot in the T-64s, and it's been that way since. The ATGMs, I really didn't use them that much the first week and a half, 2 weeks of it, just because the APF DS round was so accurate, all the way out to 1,600, 2,000 plus meters. I was pretty much wherever I put my crosshairs is where it went. Then something tricky kind of happened. All of a sudden, the spread just increased by, I don't know, it was just insane. The 800 meters head-on shots, the spread, I was unable to hit tanks where I needed to, if I could even hit the tank after 800 meters. So that's when I started using ATGMs, and I had to exploit or find the weaknesses on the T64, where I found right below the mantlet, right above the driver's seat, if you couldn't get a lower hole shot. And I'm not even going to talk about side shots or lower glacier shots, because we all know that. So I'm talking about going up against vetted players that know how to hold those tanks down. And right above the mantlet and right below the mantlet was my kill shots with the ATGM. The explosion and shrapnel usually one-shotted the whole crew if you were to sneak that ATGM in between the barrel and the driver's seat or on top of the turret. Ranges with the ATGM, I was able to do that. You know, you're talking about in a battle, it's real tough to do. You have to be real sneaky, and you don't need to be exposed for it. But it's just it's worth skill level, and you know, you could take a very professional player and put him in a bad map with a bad team, and you're not going to be able to pull off those kind of shots all the time. So it's been between the especially with the MBT-70, and I don't have the KP, but I'm just assuming it's no different. It's been a very adaptive thing week by week basis, because people that are playing it a lot, like as myself, we have noticed little changes here and there, almost on a every few days basis. You know, that we have to adapt and evolve, and it changes up our ammunition a little bit, or the way we play the tank and our effective ranges.
So we've talked about the effectiveness of the MBT's gun against other units' armor. What about the armor of the MBT? It is, once again, a new armor type, this composite armor, and a lot of people were quite skeptical of it when it was first released, because it didn't seem to be properly working, at least compared to historical standards. So, are you in the camp thinking that it's working well, at least at the moment, or is there some inaccuracies when it comes to how it's portrayed in the game?
That's a good question, man. You know, if you go looking through documents or whatnot, compared to what was released by the game, and I did my research, all of us have read and talked about this in the past. Some of the documentation, the spaced armor was supposed to be effective against chemical rounds, whereas it's advertised that its weakness is in-game chemical rounds and supposed to be good against kinetic rounds. And then I seen where the lower spaced armor was effective against chemical, and the turret armor was supposed to only be effective against kinetic. So I've seen so many, documentation or write-ups of this armor that I really am totally confused on what it really was supposed to be effective against. So, but spaced armor, just thinking out loud, for me, from my way of thinking, I would think would be effective against chemical rounds, whereas the kinetic rounds would, be more effective on it. But in-game is where it matters right now. In-game is pretty much a glass cannon against anything that can pin over 300 or 250. When about 4 days after the release of these tanks, I did a armor test when I noticed, and let me back up just a second. On day one, I remember I got a write-up on the forum of how I rushed. I think it was 2 T10s, maybe a T64, and IS-3 or something, I can't remember, on Advanced of the Rhine. I went from one, I think it's, was it Bravo to Alpha, that long street. I just rushed these 4 tanks down through there, and they were all popping me, and I was bouncing the rounds left and right off the turret, all kinetic rounds more or less. And I was able to get the 3 out of the 4 before I was taken out, but the amount of rounds I was bouncing off my turret, because these guys, this is day one, just didn't know where to shoot it. I was very excited by the performance of that. But right after that, wasn't a few days, that all of a sudden we went to do, I noticed I was getting pinned by T-44 100s through the turret, and I was like, wow, what is going on here on the cheeks? And I'm not talking through the little side optic kill spot where it's only 20 or 25 millimeters of armor there. So me and one of my co-deputies in XOF, we went into a custom match, and we tested the RU-251 chemical rounds against it, and T-44-100, and there was some other stuff we tested against it, but it didn't really matter. But at that point, the armor, in my opinion, was nerfed, and I had T-44-100 rounds at we tested at 600 meters, 400, 300 meters. We did different ranges with the basic kinetic round, and it was going straight through the cheeks, and at that point, it's been up and down. Some rounds make it, some don't. It's just almost like a bi-daily change or a weekly change with the armor on this thing. So all in all, you just need to treat it like a glass cannon, man. You really don't want to take too many hits. It does bounce some stuff like, wow, it really surprised you that it bounced, but I think it's more of an angle deal. You just got lucky. But other than that, it's pretty much, you know, you hit that tank dead center, and the way the crew's lined up in it, you're going to take it out.
So one of the biggest issues, which it sounds like you've experienced, which I have with tanks in War Thunder, is the fact that the armor itself has a modifier on it. And the modifier is pretty much plus 10, minus 10% penetration. So let's say you have 250 millimeters of effective armor. If somebody shoots you with like a 220 or 230 millimeter round, it still has a chance of penetrating you. And same with the other side, so if you have more penetration than the armor itself, you can bounce. It seems like maybe what they were doing was screwing with those modifiers in rank 6, and because they did this before with stuff like the mouse. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. But anyway, we'll get into lineups. So War Thunder isn't a one-tank game. There is always a lineup behind a single tank. It doesn't matter how good of a Tiger II driver you are, if you aren't able to be skilled in the Panthers or the Coelians, or even the Jagdpanthers or the Ferdinand, because if you do get knocked out early in the battle, the second vehicle matters quite a lot. So when we look at rank 6, the Americans have the Rise and the MBT. The Germans have the KPZ and the Beglet Panzer, but we're going to disregard that because it's just been released, so we'll say the Leopard A1A1 instead. And the Russians have the T62, T64A, and T55A. And I'm going to discount the British as well, because, well, they're not doing too well right now. So anyway, would you say that the Americans have the strongest two-tank combo? Or do you think the Russians have the edge in that regard?
I would say the American tree has the most, I hate this term, OP. I think OP is just an excuse, but we'll use it to define this. I will say the American tree is the ones to have in rank 6. It's definitely with the ammo choices and those two tanks there, and also just an example of my lineup tank-wise for rank 6. I have, my MBT-70 Rise, both the two topics. Then I run my Starship, my M60 A2. That's that thing right there. You know, the reload speed sucks, but it is in my rank 6 lineup. But yes, the American lineup is the one to have for rank 6, in my opinion. And I actually run, I have a T64, and I run my T62. I do not have the T55A. Have not, so I honestly cannot comment on that. But I would safely assume that if I was running Russians, of course, T64, T55, and T62 would be the guys that I would run. And don't disclude the much overlooked IS-4. I know the gun's not the greatest, but that armor on it is, for some reason, with the BR changes, that IS-4 is really is making a comeback. But not trying to steer off our topic, but don't look past the IS-4, guys.
Yeah, we'll talk about stuff like that another time, definitely. Especially like 7.7, basically, like that BR range.
Yeah, correct.
So, one of the interesting things, and one of the contentious things a lot of people talked about, was this matchup between the MBT and the KPZ. Because, from all intents and purposes, they're exactly the same tank, at least by performance in the game. I believe the KPC has a slightly more horse-powered engine, so a bit more power, but it doesn't seem to have any effect on it. So, with that said, do you like the idea of different nations having the same vehicles? You could even throw it Japan and US, so Bulldog versus Bulldog, Chaffee versus Chaffee. Or would you like to see a bit more variance in what different nations fight? So maybe you can get a different feel instead of grinding through a whole tree just to get to the same vehicle.
Yeah, that's a very great question. Probably one of the best ones, really, man. You know, you have these different deals. You know, we have our arcade and our RB, and you have, you know, and you can do your custom battles, whatever. But you know, it's really tough. That's where we run into a tricky thing between rank 5 and rank 6 being historic. You know, because you mix these tanks up, I think your higher BR tank should lead the way in the historic setup for RB. And hopefully that kind of answers all of it in the sum. But so far as my opinion, I pick nations based on what tanks I got to go up against. You know, I'm sure that makes sense to a lot of y'all. But you know, if I don't like going up against another, with taking my MBT and going up against another KP. I honestly feel, since those were both, you know, alliance nations at that time, I don't think they should face each other, because ultimately they were developed to fight what? The T-64. That's what the new Russian tanks at that time. So honestly, I feel the top BR tanks in a matchmaker or whatnot. I know we're talking more about my opinion, but this kind of piggybacks off of that. I feel that if KP and MBTs are in the matchmaker at all, that should dictate what you're facing. They should not face each other. So no, I don't feel like they should face each other at all. But going back down against Walker Bulldogs, facing Walker Bulldogs, my SOGs on that, what I just mentioned, I feel like the top BR tanks within the matchmaker should decide how they should historically go up against each other at that time frame. So hopefully that makes sense to you, man.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that's why I kind of advocated for a separate tree just for rank 6. So you could create this scenario where you have pretty much both sides of the Cold War fighting each other instead of having these really odd matchups. But a lot of it, unfortunately, comes down to the popularity of the vehicles in the matchmaker, which is, you know, an unfortunate thing. So we're actually going to branch off into the British, just to get your thoughts on the Chieftain Mark 10 just quickly, just because I know it's a bit out of the blue, but to be quite honest, I can't find anyone who likes the thing or even has any experience in it. So even if you haven't, do you think it is a step below stuff like the MBT and the KPZ and the T64A, or do you think it's fine where it is?
Well, I'll say this. Looking through, when I started getting serious with the game and really grinding out stuff and learning the game, the Chieftain Mark III was my #1 deal, and I spent GE, and I wanted that thing bad, man, and I got it, and I got to get several months of great gameplay out of it, and it was a very great tank at 8.0. Comparing the Mark 10 to everything else, I am very disappointed, which I knew I was going to be already the moment I got an MBT 70. I already knew that the KPs were just going to outperform them on maneuverability. And when you have tanks that top out at 40 miles per hour, you cannot, it's just, especially on a big open map like Fulda, Snai, the Chieftains and all, they can, if you're lucky enough to make it to your hold down or sniper or crow's nest positions is what I call them, you will do fine as long as you can cover your flanks. Especially in the Mark 10 with the turret armor it has. It's a great tank for that. But its horsepower is what gets it killed. It's too slow. It's definitely not an urban tank because you can't hide your vulnerable areas. Stuff like Sinai or Fulda, it does better at. But So far as the BR system on the Chieftains, I totally do not like them right now. They need to drop. I honestly feel the Chieftain Mark 10 is an 8.7. You know, I know it still puts you in the 9.0s, but I believe it's overrated in the BR. It needs to be 8.7 in my opinion. I feel the Mark 5 or even 8.3, 8.7, 8.3, because it can still be pinned. You got to think this is the same. The only thing different on the Mark 10 is its ammo and the turret, the top turret, and still this protection on that turret is very minimal. You still kill it like you do, like you kill any other Chieftain. Okay, it's no different. You're fighting the same tanks actually, you know, in my opinion. But I feel the Chieftain Mark III can honestly, it could go 7.7 or stay 8.0. I feel the Mark 5 should be 8.0 to 8.3, and the Mark 10 8.3 to 8.7, more, you know, 8.7. But it is not a 9.0. Now, if we were able to get, and you know, don't quote me on this, but I think I read the Mark 11 had the steel brew armor on the hull. Now, okay, people are like, well, it's impenetrable, you won't be able to kill it. Well, that's the whole point. It has its weak points, and you're supposed to adapt to it, right? You know, you have armor in the front, but I'd love to see the Mark 11 come in at 9.0. It would be sure enough fair, because it still does not have what? It does not have the horsepower compared to these other tanks, the KPs and the T64. It does not have the horsepower. So it can easily still be flanked, and that'll make these guys, these KP and T64 players, really work for more. You know, whereas you don't want, you know, you hear it all the time, you know, these nations, well, what difficulty level you want? If you want easy, you pick this nation. If you want if you want hard difficulty, you pick this nation. You know, and that's where the Brits are at rank 6. If you want difficult rank 6 tanks to play and compete against, yeah, go with the Brits. You want to really test your skills. And I hate that for them. But yes, Chieftain Mark 3 through 10 needs to be dropped in BR, in my opinion. And I'd love to see the Mark 11 make a showing to help out the Brits, man. It would definitely be an equalizer, and it could still be killed very easily. It just not head on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Mark 11 would be a nice addition, just because it would actually give something to the Chieftain that it's good at. Unfortunately, even the Mark 10, yes, it has the turret, but in order to find a hold down position, there's already 4 or 5 MBTs or KPZs behind you, or 3 or 4 T64As already in hold down positions, knowing where you're going to be. But anyway, move on to the next point, which is much more of a general point. So when the rank 6 vehicles were introduced, they were at 8.7, and the reason for this was they wanted people in 8.7 vehicles to be able to still get games. If they put the rank 6 vehicles at 9.0 straight away, they would have struggled to get into games, just because everybody was grinding for them. So after about a month, they changed it, pushed them up to 9.0, and kept some at 8.7. Also jerry-rigged some of the other ATGM launchers and stuff like that. Do you think it's made that much of a difference in the battle rating, or the matchmaking, I should say? Or is it just for certain specific tanks where it's helped out?
Well, I feel it definitely was a good change, you know, minus the Brits. I think, you know, again, we just got finished talking about that, so no need to bring that back up. But, yeah, it's made a lot of other tanks more enjoyable to play again. For instance, the mouse. I'm not a mouse owner, and I am grinding for that right now. But all your 7.7, 7.3 tanks have been reborn, in my opinion. It's fun for those guys again, and many of my friends in War Thunder outside of XOF, you know, which Crumpo for one, he's going to enjoy me mentioning his name, but in 2 weeks notice there, he you know, he has all the 9.0 tanks, and yet we play T62s a good bit. We still play 8.0 or 7.7 just because, you know, you don't have stabilizers, and it's just you're slower. You ain't got to worry about being rushed unless you're, you know, going up against RUs. But they're easily dealt with. But yeah, it just makes the game more it's just fun again. I enjoy it. I'm glad everything went to 9.0, and I completely understand and respect why they started everything at 8.7, because you've already explained that, and I believe the majority of the season community understood that as well. But yeah, I like the BR changes minus the Chieftains. It has definitely made the game fun, or again, for a lot of people that were getting burnt out with dealing with the MB KPs and T64s with their 7.7s and occasionally 7.3s.
Yeah, the majority of the changes I agreed with. The only ones I kind of disagreed with was the swing fire and its brother, the faster one, because I felt like they could have been dropped and, you know, not really much would have changed. But what is interesting is not just talking about the now, but also talking about the future. So, first of all, do you think we need more rank 6 tanks? Not really to balance the meta, but more about stuff so people can grind for them, people can strive for them, or do you think right now having 2 or 3 tanks for each nation, obviously not Japan, is a good move? And do you even have any thoughts on maybe some kind of Japanese rank 6 vehicle they could throw in?
Yeah, that's another great question. For right now, I feel the Americans are good to go because, and I'm going to go through the nations, okay, from left to right.
Yep.
So for the Americans, you really, anything newer for the Americans at this point right now compared to everybody else, you would really throw the Americans way ahead of everybody when it comes to main battle tank, okay? I'm not talking about wheeled vehicles or personnel carriers. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking MBT, or main battle tanks.
You're basically talking about prototype Abrams at that point, aren't you?
Yes, correct. And you know, and also if they're trying, the goal is, and again we're talking about Americans still at this point. The only other things that I know of right now is, you know, you'll have the M60 upgraded Raytheons, Raytheon upgrades, which I posted some stuff up not long ago. You guys can
I'll put a link in the description to the stuff.
Yeah, great. Basically, what they did with that was just upgrade the drivetrain, the whole gun system in it, and ERA, and some other things. Basically, it's a M60 A3 with a 120, a lot of ERA, and a lot more horsepower. That right there, if they introduced that to Americans, that'd be the only problem with that would be the timeline. They didn't start doing that till I think the late 80s or throughout the 90s. So I think the Americans at this point, main battle tank wise, we're finished for a while until everybody else gets caught up. I can see like a Bradley or something coming in, something fun, maybe some new AA, some, you know, lighter vehicles, which there's plenty of that stuff the Americans have that just weren't really used. They were pretty much canned and, you know, whatnot. So moving to the Germans, let's see here. So far as for the Germans, I would really like to see the late 70s, early 80s model Leopard come out. I believe it was the A1, A2, the next Leopard series or whatnot. I kind of predict that main battle, again, talking main battle tanks, I'm not talking anything else. I kind of predict to see that come out for them. You know, of course, that's the Abrams and the next series of Leopards both can't stem from the MBT KP research, you know, prototypes or whatnot. And you can look up the history on those tanks between America and Germany, how that was developed and how it went from there. So, but so far as Germany, I would like to see the A1, A2 next come into play. And moving on to Russia, I actually did some research on this yesterday while I was on duty at the department. So, just quick little deal through the 80s. You had the T-72s, all right, come out after T-64A. Okay, T-72s were a great tank. Then I was looking up the T-80. Well, they turn around. At this point, you know, I've heard some people mention throughout the game, what about the T-64B? Can't wait for the T-64B. Well, the T-64B was not actually implemented or a thing until the late 80s, or mid to late 80s. So for you to do that, you're skipping past the T-72 and the T-80. So the T-80 was a major fail, and the T-72 made a comeback. And they started retrofitting, changing a few things on it, and then they brought in the T-64Bs with ERA all over it. But so far as Russian main battle tanks, I definitely like to see the T-72 come in next. I definitely think that would be one of those things everybody's going to cry about. It'll definitely make the Russian players happy, but I'd like to see the T-72 come out, and you know, and you're of course talking a lot larger BR, higher BR. Sliding over to the Brits, I think you already know what I'm going to say there. I'd like to see the Mark 11 come in, man. I mean, that's just the end of the story there. I really believe the Brits are well deserving. I like to see the other chieftains drop in BR. I'd like to see the Mark 11 come in. I really would. It can happen. We got the information to do it. I don't know why they haven't done it, but they need to do it. Moving on to the Japs. At this point, I'm really ignorant on that time, the late 70s through 80s. If I'm not mistaken, I think they were doing a lot of trading and buying and subbing out military contract, you know, buying other people's equipment. So basically what I think you'll see there is you're going to see other nations' tanks in that time era for rank 6. So it's kind of be like, oh, I've seen that before. Kind of like, you know, the Bulldog and the, you know, the Shermans and stuff like that. You're not going to see anything really originally Japanese until, I think, mid-80s. I could, you know, I don't quote me on that, but I believe I'm pretty close to that time area. I don't think the Japanese really didn't start making their own stuff until probably mid-80s or late 80s again. But so far as the Italians, I'm ignorant on that tank-wise, so I'm afraid to comment on that. I have not done my research and do not know my history on that. But France, I am really excited to see. So far as rank 6, like the AMX series, my timelines are off on that, but I'd like to see the AMX series come in all the way to rank 6, you know, at 9.0, all the way up to 9.0. I would definitely be checking those out. And let's see here, rank 5, what BR spread do we have here? It's what does it go, 6.7 to 8.3, so I feel like it'd be safe, you know, in the future. I could see us spreading out to 10.3, you know, in the future, but that's a thing, you know. I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon. That'd be years to come, like 2 years down the road probably, because you don't want to throw everything, you don't want to throw the kitchen sink at your customers. They'll get stale real fast. So, you know, it is a business, so I can definitely understand that. As much as excited and anticipated as we want to be, you know, I'd like to see it, you know, but yeah, it definitely probably killed the business if they did that. But yeah, that's pretty much my opinion on that, Boom.
So when it comes to Japan, there's conflicting information. So the main tank that they used in the 90s and started developing in the late 80s was one called the Type 9. And there is no way that is getting anywhere near game in its current state. And there is the conflicting information part is that supposedly, now I can't find any information on this apart from various people saying it on the War Thunder Reddit, is that there was a Type 74 which was developed with ERA on it. So that would probably be what we're going to get at rank 6. And moving on from the future rank 6, there is always, after another rank or another set of vehicles added, people then speculate about the next step. So that would be rank 7 in this case. Now rank 7 would include stuff like the Abrams, the Leopard 2, the Challenger, the Type 9, or it might be the Type 90 actually, I might be getting that wrong. Now, when it comes to adding rank 7, there's a lot of issues, especially with the armor of the vehicles that we're looking at. Now, do you want to expand on that, like especially with stuff like the Chobham armor on the Challenger and the Abrams?
Yeah, sure, I can give my opinion on that. All that stuff's classified for War Thunder to mimic it. It would be very difficult. There are plenty of other tank simulation games that do that. I mean, it's already, they just mimic it and just take guesstimates of what the armor is or whatnot. Now, so far as effectiveness on the Abrams and the Challenger and all this stuff, that is not classified so far as effectiveness. Anybody can Google it up and you can look. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think turret effective armor on the, between chemical and kinetic rounds for the Abrams, I believe, is around 1,200 on the cheeks of the turret. Okay, so we can just, at that point, all I think the game or War Thunder could do at that point is just do simple math on that. Just saying, hey, you got to have somewhere close to 1,200 millimeters of pin or to have more. The rounds, I'd have to Google it right quick on today's rounds of what they can and can't penetrate, which you have so many different rounds of modern tanks now. But yeah, I think, that's a point to where going to rank 7 or even, that's just so far ahead of everything, man. I'd like to just, I don't even know if you can actually mix that at that point, because you're pretty much like anything at 9.0, it'd be no different taking a 9.0 and throwing it into like a 4.0 match at that point. Because nothing's going to pin it, not from the front anyways. But can you make it happen? Yeah, you probably could. That's where your skill's going to come into play. But you'd have to have much larger maps because you got, I know the Abrams and in their siege in the Middle East, in Desert Storm, they were making shots on T-64s, T-72s, over 3,000 meters, and they were tearing turrets off over 3,000 meters. I was watching a documentary not long ago, man, and it was so overwhelming, man. I forgot the amount of number in that siege or assault, how many T-72s the Americans, the Abrams, took out and how many they lost. It was very overwhelming, man. There was no competition. So that being said, I do think there is a possibility. I'd like to see War Thunder pursue it. I'd like to see it because I would definitely be into that. I'm just as much into that as I am the World War I, World War II stuff as well. But I believe we would need a bigger BR spread. This could be political here, but there would probably be a big BR gap if you wanted to keep them in the same tech tree. It would be a huge BR gap. I'd say almost by 1.5 or more, at that point. And what would fill those gaps? Hell, I don't know, man. AA, modern AA, stuff like that would fill those gaps, or personnel carriers or other things, because who knows what else would come into the tank RB matches of War Thunder later on. Yeah, I would definitely put them on a higher BR. And me and you have discussed this before about separating the ranks, and and I agree with your points, and I know you agree with mine, and it's just one of those things to keep it streamlined and to keep people in the same server and in the same game. I like to see them stay in the same tree, not separate the ranks, but just put a bigger BR spread, and put a big gap. Just say like 10-0 is just, there's nothing there existence for each nation. And it would be nation dependent, of course, because I know Germany would probably have something to fill that void. I know the Japs would probably have something, what you already mentioned, would fill that void in there. But the Americans surely would not have nothing to fill that void in that big BR gap. It just is what it is, and people would just have to accept that as customers to War Thunder. But I feel that would be the best way to implement that, and I would like to see it. I really would. I myself and a lot of others, and you may not admit it, but you'd probably like to see it, man. It'd be fun.
I'd like to see how they implement it. Like, I think that would be interesting to see if they develop a new type of armor, or if they just basically, as you said, just say, right, this chunk is like 1200 millimeters. You know, go for it. Try and pen that. I think that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
But anyway, I think that will bring us to a close today. So, I thank Mofo for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me.